You're listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and SoundCloud. So, final score from Piscataway, Ohio State 56, Rutgers 21. A lot of Ohio State fans are freaking out that Ohio State's reserves gave up 2 second-half touchdowns to Rutgers. I was just kind of, looking through Twitter, and I listened to the Cleveland.com Ohio State pod, and a lot of fans were writing in with concerns about kind of what was an relatively uninspired performance by Ohio State. I don't know. I mean,
I got to stay off those pages, Zach, because
seriously.
I some of the stuff these people write is just unbelievable.
I agree with you.
They should have kept the first string in long. I'm like, just shut the fuck up.
Seriously.
Please spare us all.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, I'm guessing the news probably got to Ryan Day about the Tua injury. And you saw Justin Fields toward the end of the first half. He actually had to go to the medical tent and get his throwing hand looked at. So I would assume after that, Ohio State really kind of went into a shell, and Day, didn't want to take any risks with any of his starters, Justin Fields most especially. I don't know. Those 21 points by Rutgers, 2 of them were set up by Ohio State turnovers. 2 of them were given up by. 14 of those points were given up by Ohio State reserves long after the outcome of the game had been decided. I mean, Rutgers ran the ball 40 times. They averaged 2.8 yards a carry. Rutgers starting quarterback Johnny Langan, he played the whole game. He finished 12 of 26 for 121 yards and 2 picks. I mean, I don't think we saw something where, Rutgers found a weakness. They found a cheat code or something, and they were running the ball at will, or, were able to exploit Ohio State in the passing game. I think it was all about, 2 turnovers that set Rutgers up deep in Ohio State territory. Lots of playing time for Ohio State's second and third teamers. I don't know how you guys feel about this. I wouldn't read too much into what we saw in the second half of that game. Why don't we go around the horn and get some impressions? Chad, what did you see from that game that stood out?
I mean, obviously it's what we expected. I mean, I was pretty much ready to turn it over to the Georgia-Auburn game, 5 minutes into the game.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'll tell you what, there were some great passes by Fields, some great catches. Olave had a killer grab, and so did Farrell, man. That for a tight end, that was a hell of a grab. I will give that quarterback at Langan kid a little bit of kudos, man. He ran straight over Tough Borland.
Yeah.
I mean, just put his head down and ran him right over.
He's a big dude.
I thought the defense played well. But again, like we've talked all season, it was Rutgers. So, I think that all these people that are just, spewing off, their negativity about this and that, they're just uneducated, like stupid people. Obviously we've got a big stretch coming up. So, obviously we've got to save our players. And, the second and third stringers, I don't think they played that bad. There was a couple, like you said, Zach, a couple turnovers, second half where those scores shouldn't even happen.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, I think the first 2 quarters we looked crisp, we looked good. But, we're ready for next week, man.
Yeah, it's all about next week. Matt, what did you see in that game yesterday that stood out to you?
Well, I mean, the team lifts itself when we play better competition, and then we have destroyed them. So that they have a lackluster game, admittedly, with most second and third teamers, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, we rested a lot of people for this game. A lot of people didn't make the trip.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that really kind of bugs me is that, and it doesn't bug me, this sports, but I mean, Dobbins he would be having a unforgettable season, but these big wins against these teams, he's being cheated out of making so. I mean, he would have been well over 1,500 yards so far.
Oh yeah,
and I'd even go Steele as well would probably be at 1,000. He got taken out fairly early in your boy Steel Chambers came in and did his number. But you know what? It's a Rutgers game. You have half the team playing. You have the second and third teamers, and like our good friend who isn't on today, Franken Spreadsheet said, the remaining games is the next games that all the rest of the games here are what matters.
Yeah.
So we have to really. This is where we got to amp it up, and if we win big, fine. If we win by a touchdown, fine. We just got to win out the rest of the road. Yeah. So hopefully resting these guys and giving these guys some reps, but being known that we got to pick it up. We can't come in like we did against Rutgers. We have to come in like we did against, Wisconsin and Penn State, and not Penn State, but Wisconsin and Michigan State, and just throw it down.
Yeah. It's a 5-game season now, as Tim said earlier this week. Paige, what did you see yesterday?
More of the same. I mean, it just goes to show you how pathetic Rutgers is, that they can't even qualify into, like, this would be a trap game for Ohio State. Like, think about, they're coming off a bye, right? And then they just know, right? They know that they're going to be playing two inferior opponents in Maryland and Rutgers. But for the Maryland game, right, we had the Chase Young stuff going on. It was home. I could see them getting up for the Maryland game. There was just no possible way they were getting up for this game. They just weren't. Yeah. I mean, it was on the road.
It's cold.
Rutgers Stadium, cold, zero energy in that stadium. And, they still bust out to a 21-point lead. If Wilson doesn't muff that punt, then I think the score, might have been closer to, what we all expected it to be.
That's a good point.
But that play kind of changed the momentum of the game. But it was never in doubt. And, I just think, everyone on the planet knew their main goal is get out of this game with a W and, without any injuries. And they accomplished that. And, I thought, like Plummer said, some of those, balls by Fields, those were beautiful balls. Like, he was playing great. I didn't feel like the offensive line was playing that well.
I agree.
They were giving Dobbins, a little bit of a fit here and there, but all in all, it was the game that we expected. I'm happy it's over. I'm sure everybody on the Ohio State coaching staff is happy that game is over. Get in, get the W, and get the fuck out. That was the whole plan.
And mission accomplished. Mike, what did you see yesterday in that game?
Not much. I was playing darts mostly and just kind of glancing over my shoulder. And we didn't even really watch much of the second. We were flipping over to the Minnesota-Iowa.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, how do you get up for a 52-point favorite game? There's no way. I agree with that. I'm actually happy to see that we didn't cover. We had like some weak spots to at least talk about. I mean, weak spots. Come on. Maybe the guy ripped off the quarterback scrambled for about 15 yards. We all looked at it, raised their eyebrows. Oh, what was that? What's going on here? What do we got here? And then you see those perfect throws to Wilson and the tight end. It just boom, gets us both feet down. I was thinking, why don't we save those plays?
Yeah.
The big games, those perfect plays that I felt bad for Rutgers. Like, why did this have to happen to them? We could have got that on anybody.
Yeah, there was
that's it.
Yeah, there were 3 really nice pass plays. Olave made the play on the deep ball that was underthrown. He pulled it off his shoestrings, which was amazing. There was a great, I think one of you guys made reference to the throw to Farrell in the corner of the end zone, which was a beautifully thrown ball and a great catch. There was another great throw to Ben Victor on Ohio State's second touchdown play, also in the corner of the end zone. Fields is really good at placing the ball on those types of throws. It was good to see him go downfield a little bit. Granted, it was Rutgers, but I heard an interesting stat earlier in the week, and I tried to look it up. I could not find this stat anywhere. Granted, I didn't do too much digging, but I was trying to find where Ohio State ranks nationally in yards of 40, in plays of 40 yards or more. in the passing game, because Bill Landis of The Athletic had said earlier this week that Ohio State is like 110th or something in the country in pass plays over 40 yards. If you're gonna point out a weakness, if you can call it that, is that they haven't really gone downfield in the passing game all that much this year. And there were a couple of nice deep balls to Olave. Granted, it was against Rutgers, but that's something I think you would want to see in out of Ohio State going into now this 5-game season of all their biggest games. The ability to at least test a defense deep down the field. So it was good to see them complete a couple of balls. Olave caught another one, which is a little better thrown ball earlier in the game, I think it was. So that was nice to see. The other thing that stood out a little bit to me, I guess that made me raise an eyebrow, was the 4th and goal stop by Rutgers on Dobbins in the second quarter. And I think that kind of speaks to somewhat of an uninspired performance from the run game yesterday. Again, only in 2 quarters, though. I mean, they didn't even get a chance to make amends in the second half because everybody was on the bench. But that was a little weird to see Rutgers come up with the 4th down stop. Then again, Day called 4 straight run plays for Dobbins to end that drive. It stands to reason that, against an opponent like Penn State or Michigan, that's not how he's going to call the game, right? You're going to mix it up a little bit, maybe a read option with, Fields keeping it, or, you try and do something in the passing game there. But all in all, yeah, Paige, as you said, Ohio State handled their business without any injuries, and also avoiding kind of a weird, wonky result that might make the committee think of them a little bit differently. And I think that's kind of, we'll talk about it later in the pod, that's a little bit what happened to LSU against Ole Miss. The way they performed in that game might have people questioning them. Are there any other observations, comments on the Rutgers game that you guys want to add before we move on to the other action around the country?
So one thing I was thinking about, and not so much about Rutgers, but I wonder about this team not have honestly played any close games all year, right? And that's just a different ball game, and it's something that I was concerned about a little bit with Day coming in. Just the game management in a tight ball game. Because Urban was so great in that, but we have not. I mean, every game is freaking over in the second quarter, and we know that's going to change. And I just kind of wonder if that's a concern for the coaching staff and how this team reacts when that happens.
Yeah, the thing I would say really quickly is that we have started the game behind the 8 ball a little bit on a couple games in the first quarter. Now, we haven't gone into the fourth quarter where we've been down, where we've been behind. So, yeah, you can see that. But we have responded at least a couple times when we've unexpectedly been on the catch-up, have been trailing. So, but I hear your point. It's a good one.
I agree, Sloaner, because there was a couple times, like we talked about it earlier in the pod, like this season in the pod, where it was great to see the adjustments made by Day and the coaching staff. So I'm not worried about that at all. I don't think it's going to be. I think the game will be over in the second quarter next week. I think Michigan's probably the only game that's going to be a test for us, being in Ann Arbor. I still don't think they can hang with us, but I think But I feel confident in Day and Hafley and all those guys making adjustments at halftime and when needed.
Yeah,
would it be nothing? Oh, go ahead, Jack.
No, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say the thing that would be the sweetest would be Michigan leading us at halftime, and everywhere in Ann Arbor they're doing double shots of triple sec, which is probably what they drink there. And then we just come back and crush them. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they haven't had a lot of those moments this year, to your point, Paige. The only 2 that I can think of that were meaningful, and they were earlier in the game. They weren't fourth quarter, worries. But the Michigan State game, we jumped out to a 10-0 lead in that game, and in the second quarter, you guys probably remember, Michigan State scored to make it 10-7 early in that second quarter. Then Ohio State, turned it on and ended up running away with that game. By halftime, it was over. And then the Wisconsin game, we go into the half up 10-0. Obviously, weather had a hand in that. but then Wisconsin comes out in the second half, gets the block punt, and then they score to make that a 10-7 game in the third quarter. Those are the only two moments where I really felt there was any kind of consternation, any kind of concern on the part of Buckeye fans. And it will be interesting to see, should Penn State and or Michigan be four-quarter games, how Day handles himself. Certainly, if you think they advance beyond that and they play and get into the college football playoff, you would expect a four-quarter game, and I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. But I mean, these are first world problems, aren't they?
Yeah. Just looking for things to be concerned about.
Yeah.
Got to manufacture concerns for this team at this point.
It was interesting, I guess. So at the start of the game, they weren't on the participation report that they release, the availability report that they release, I think on Thursday or Friday. But they sat Damon Arnett yesterday. He did not play at all. I think. Well, Mack was on the availability report. I think he was going to be a scratch as well. It was weird because I didn't think Jonathan Cooper was going to play, but then I saw in the box score he was credited with a tackle. I tend to think that might have been another player that wears the same number because I didn't see Cooper out there. He didn't play.
He didn't play.
He did not play. Chase Young obviously did not play. We did not have who else were we without? We were without
Browning.
Thank you, Browning. Yeah. So I mean, there were a few guys. Matt, I think you even mentioned this. There were a few guys that didn't even make the trip or weren't even in uniform, and then everybody that was a starter or played meaningful snaps seemed to sit after halftime. So not too much. I would not glean too much from anything that we really saw in this game at all. Ohio State handled their business. The perception is intact, I think, and physically they're intact going into the stretch here. Any other comments, guys, that you had about the Rutgers performance before we move on? Okay. Let's move on to some of the other action that happened around the country. I'm going to say Penn State, Indiana for a little later because I think we want to talk a little bit about Penn State looking ahead to next week. How about Iowa, Minnesota? I thought that was an interesting result. Iowa jumped all over Minnesota. Credit to Minnesota for coming back and having a chance to win that game late or tie it late. Kinnick is a really tough place to go if you're a top 10 team. Really tough turnaround for Minnesota. They get an emotional win against Penn State at home, then have to turn around and play the Hawkeyes on the road the following week. Does that ring a bell for Ohio State fans, guys? Why does that ring a bell for me? I don't know. A couple years ago, we had to do the same thing, and Iowa got us. Chad, did you happen to see any of that game? And if you did, what were your thoughts?
I did watch that, and I think I sent that to thought. I mean, Francis, I think he's like 10-1 at home, favored by 3 points or less, which is pretty impressive. But Minnesota just had some. They had a couple missed field goals. They had, they went for it on a 4th and goal. I mean, Minnesota didn't play their game, but hey, Iowa, man, that defensive line, they showed up yesterday. I mean, there's a couple of boys on there that had some good plays, but it kind of sucks. I kind of wanted to see Minnesota win that game, but it is what it is, I guess.
Well, and I still think they're in the driver's seat in the West too, right? I mean, all is not lost for Minnesota. They still have a lead in the West, and honestly, if things fall right, they could very well find themselves still in the playoff discussion going into the Big Ten title game. So, all's not lost for them. Sorry, Paige, were you going to make a point?
No, but they're out of the playoff. Come on, I don't think they're done. The other thing. We talked about this game on the prediction pod, and it had all the trappings, right? But I was like, God, I just don't see it. I think Minnesota's going to do it. I was totally wrong. Stanley played a hell of a game. That guy was throwing darts. Why they can't get consistent play out of that guy has got to be super frustrating to the Iowa fans. But the other thing Timmy and I were talking about as we were watching that, the whole time I'm thinking to myself, what does this say about Penn State? And that's after watching the Indiana, and I know we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But I just had me, playing it forward where I'm like, okay, I wasn't a huge believer in Minnesota, but the fact that they knocked off Penn State, that's what we were talking about mostly watching that performance. I agree. Like, I really wanted Minnesota to win it, but Iowa just was the better team, plain and simple.
Well, it's funny because Minnesota outgained Iowa 431 to 290. I mean, that's not trivial. I mean, they really, I actually only saw bits and pieces of the game, but Minnesota certainly in the box score, time of possession, they had an edge in some key areas. But yeah, credit to Iowa. They found a way to Go ahead.
Yeah,
Paige.
they did. Like, just watching the game, like, Minnesota had some late drives, and that's where they put up most of those yards. But when Iowa needed to make a play, they made a play, and Minnesota couldn't stop them. And it was just, Iowa jumped out to a big lead and kind of held on, but controlled the game. I mean, they played the game that they wanted to play, and, Minnesota was able to put up, a fair amount of yards just trying to claw back into it, but that's what you have to do when you're down. So,
yeah. They couldn't run the ball.
Then
they could not run the ball in that game. Yeah. Iowa had completely taken the run away and really forced Minnesota to be one-dimensional. And they got after Tanner Morgan, too. 6 sacks of Morgan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
3 of them were in that last drive when they had 1:50 seconds left. I mean, that one dude had 2 of them. I mean, that offensive line just basically just laid down and let them come in. Like, I thought, like, all right, there's 1:50 left. I think that quarterback's pretty good. Like, I expected him to at least, have a chance. But, that defensive line for Iowa, man, they got in there.
Yeah, they were good. A.J. Epinesa was the guy for Iowa. He had 2.5 sacks yesterday. He was definitely a force in that game for them. Sloaner, did you happen to catch any of the Minnesota-Iowa game yesterday?
Yeah, I did. And bottom line is styles make fights. And they came in and they took advantage of everything that Minnesota gave them. And when you're at home and your game is clicking on both sides of the ball, the other team's not capitalizing, making bump and making turnovers. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to happen. That's why, as much as we could talk about Penn State and this and that, it's like what Penn State team shows up next week and what Ohio State team shows up. You never know. That's what the great thing about sports is. You never know. Something the unexpected could happen. But, yeah, to Plummer's point, man, God, it seemed like that OL line was gassed at the end. It's like, okay, guys, you protect your undefeated season, go down the field, and they basically those O linemen just let the guy, just gave him no protection. I thought they were to go at least to the 50-yard line to heave a bomb. Mm-hmm. But
another thing for you that.
Go ahead, Chad. Go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say another thing that really hurt him because their starting field goal, their starting field goal kicker was injured, so he wasn't playing in that game. And when they went down and scored there at the end, and they missed that point because that made a big difference because they could have, like, a field goal could have, tied the game, but he missed that extra point, so they stopped Iowa and they had to score a touchdown.
Yeah, good point. Mike, what did you see in that game yesterday? Anything that stood out?
I was dead wrong on that too. I had Minnesota in the preview cast.
So did I.
And I thought, I think the difference was just the home and away team. I mean, I was impressed with Minnesota when they beat Penn State, but they were home. They were up for that game. They're about comparable with an Iowa team, a 6-3 Iowa team. And I was home. They were up for it. And, they just prevailed. This is a big game for them. This is kind of their they had a chance to knock off an undefeated rival. So they wanted that pig, that bronze pig, Floyd of Rosedale. Did you guys get that link? There's a whole backstory on that I read. I thought it was interesting.
I did see that. That's hilarious. Floyd of Rosedale. They play for a bronze pig in that series. I love it. Chad, you made a good point about the missed extra point by Minnesota late, because that really might have changed how Minnesota approaches that last drive. If you only need a field goal instead of a touchdown, that was huge. And actually, that's a really good observation.
And Fleck had to use a timeout on which he shouldn't have needed to use, and that so they didn't have 3 timeouts going into that drive either. So it kind of put them in the fucking backseat of the bus.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, so I still think Minnesota comes out of the West. I know they've got a big matchup November 30th, the same day that we play Michigan. There's a huge matchup in Minneapolis against Wisconsin. That's probably going to be for the division. But I just think they're dynamic in the passing game, and I think that's going to give them an edge over Wisconsin in that finale. So I still like Minnesota to come out of the West. Then again, we'll see. I mean, we see some of these teams that look great for 8 games, and then they get into November, and the lack of depth, when everybody's worn down and nicked up and banged up, and they probably don't have the same. Well, they certainly don't have the same luxury as like an Ohio State or some of these other programs where they can bring in guys off the 2 deep to fill in the plug in the holes left by some starters who are a little nicked up. So we'll see how Minnesota bounces back from this, but I still tend to think the West is going to be they're going to win the West. All right, guys, let's move on to the LSU Ole Miss game. I'm going to give you my impressions of what happened, and then we'll go around the horn. What really stood out to me in that game, the LSU defense giving up 37 points and 614 yards of total offense to, let's face it, an Ole Miss team that's just not very good, not very dynamic. 402 of those yards were given up on the ground. Ole Miss's quarterback is strictly a run-first quarterback, really can't do much with his arm. If you're looking at LSU's schedule and you go back and look at some of their earlier games, last week they gave up 541 yards to Alabama. Now, there's no disgrace in that. That's an Alabama offense that's loaded with NFL talent. But you go back to the Texas game and look at Texas lost again yesterday. That's a 6-4 team now. They gave up 530 yards of total offense to Texas earlier this year, 457 to Florida earlier this year. I think LSU's defense is a problem. I think it's a big problem. And I think it should, a matchup with Ohio State, I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but I like our defense in that matchup if it happens. Should LSU even get there, I tend to think that offense could cost them. That defense could cost them before they even get to a national title game. I think it's a problem. 614 yards to Ole Miss. I think it's a problem. Matt, did you catch any of that game? And if you did, what were your impressions?
I caught a little bit of it, but I looked at the stats this morning because you sent that over, and that's just like those games and the Alabama game, and you make a great point about the Texas game as well. I mean, there's no way you're going to get a national championship if you're giving over 400 yards of offense to the opposing team.
I agree,
and especially one that with a substandard. I'm like, it heartens our thing because we have a good balance on for our team, but you're putting extra pressure on your offense, and you are keeping your defense on the field longer because you can't do 3 and outs. So that may bode in your favor, having your explosive offense, getting some rest in the first 2 quarters, but the second half of the game, that's just going to, house of cards are going to fall down. So. Yeah, they got to figure something out pretty quickly because there's only so much the offense can do, and it can't play defense.
Paige, did you see any of that game? And if you did, what were your takeaways?
No, I didn't watch one play. We actually had the Baylor Oklahoma game on, which was amazing. And it was. I was thinking about it. It was exactly the scenario that Sloaner was just talking about. Like if we were down at halftime at Michigan, because Baylor kicked their ass in the first half, and then the wheels just came off, and the people in the stands were just completely stunned. It was kind of funny to watch, but I did not watch one snap of the LSU game. But who did Texas lose to? I didn't even realize they lost, because that was a big deal. I think, I think the committee, it was a 6-3 Texas team that was unranked, beat some crappy team before, and then all of a sudden is ranked 19, because I think they do that shit to bolster their arguments as far as what teams are ranked and what teams are not ranked. And the fact that Texas went down again, how good really is LSU? I mean, I didn't watch any of that game, but obviously they've got a big problem on their hands with their defense.
Chad, what did you see in that game yesterday that stood out?
Well, I mean, I think you and I were texting back and forth at the end of that game and the end of the Oklahoma game. But nothing like. I mean, Burrow he's a stud. I mean, he had a couple interceptions, but kid's got an arm, man. But their defense, not to beat a dead horse, they can't stop us. I mean, they'd have to have an act of God to stop us, like for an entire game.
Force majeure. Mike, did you catch any of that game? And if you did, what did you think?
I didn't catch any of it. I'm just glancing at the box score. I would just be, I'll be the lone voice of caution here. There could be legitimate reasons why they gave up a lot of yards to Ole Miss. They just came down from a big win.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama, they could have been beat up a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the score. They never really let it within 14 points. That was the closest it got. Was it a close? I guess it depends on how they scored. They racked up those yards and points, if they were a big play or what, or if you really see legitimate holes there. But the game, it's not like they were in danger there, any kind of jeopardy.
What
they could not deal. Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
Yeah. I said, to your point, Zach, like it's like a weekly trend with them, though. It's not just like Ole Miss; it's everybody.
Yeah. No, I mean they have.
They
have 3 performances this season where they've given up over 500 yards of total offense, and I think really that
was Texas, Alabama,
and Ole Miss, and then another 457 to Florida, who's solid. They're a good team, but I wouldn't say a potent offense by any means. And I think kind of looking in the rear view at Texas at the time, that seemed like okay, no big deal. You're on the road, you're in Austin, it's Texas. They've got a good quarterback. But now, kind of with hindsight, you're talking about a 6-4 Texas team who, in some of these games, has really struggled to generate some offense. Yet they put up 530 against LSU. But I do think you make a good point, Mike, that there's no doubt that LSU had to be beat up from that track meet with Alabama the week before. I definitely think that had to have played a hand, especially in the second half against Ole Miss. This John Reese Plumlee, is the name of the quarterback from Ole Miss, who just chewed him up yesterday. He's a run-first quarterback. He ran for 212 yards and 4 touchdowns against LSU. And really, in that inside zone read, they had no answer, LSU. The defense had no answer for him. I mean, he was just ripping off chunk plays left and right. And the LSU defense looked pretty hapless in the second half of that game. Any other comments? Go ahead, Paige.
What's LSU's schedule from here?
So I believe all the hay's in the barn, so to speak, with them. So they've got Arkansas next week at home, and then they finish at home against Texas A&M, who is, they're not bad. They're 7-3 A&M. That's a game to watch right there. A&M. I don't necessarily know. I mean, that could be, hey, if you're struggling with Ole Miss, with that defense the way they play, I don't know, man. I tend to think that could be a pretty good game and one that LSU can't overlook. Was
it a struggle of a game? Was it
Ole Miss?
Yeah. Was it? Did it feel like it was close?
Not early. It was a 31-7 halftime lead by LSU, but then in the second half, it got uncomfortable there in the fourth quarter. I think Ole Miss had got it down to about 14, which when you consider how big the deficit was earlier in that game, I think that's pretty uncomfortable if you're an LSU fan sitting there watching that. The yards and points have to be troubling. I don't think that can be overlooked or dismissed. I mean, we've seen Urban Meyer teams that have this same issue, where they play an overmatched opponent who put up lots of yards and points on us. We kind of dismiss it, no big deal, but at some point later in the season, it ends up catching up to us. I have a feeling that might happen here with LSU sometime within the next, 5 to 6 games, wherever their season ends. They may win the whole damn thing and just outscore everybody, but I don't know. History would say you've got to be able to play a little defense to win a title, right?
Yeah, I mean, is that the problem that happened with our Troy Smith team when we played Florida? We were all Heisman winner Troy Smith, and really no one that great on defense.
Yeah,
that came crumbling down.
Yeah, it did. I remember that defense being pretty good. Yeah, you're right, because we played Michigan in the finale that year, and Michigan put up tons of 39, and Mike Hart ran all over us, and Henne threw all over us. We had to outscore.
Yeah, we were at that game.
Yeah, oh, you were there. Okay. Yeah, I and for some reason I'm thinking more of that's a good example, Matt. I'm also thinking of some of these Urban Meyer teams, like that 2013 team. They ended up losing like Christian Bryant in the Wisconsin game, their starting safety, and they were just never able to find a replacement for him. And there were some games down the stretch against, middling teams where they put up lots of yards and points, but couldn't stop our offense. We still win decisively, but you came away thinking, like, I don't know, could that be a problem against better competition? So I get the sense that that's where we are with this LSU team. Just my 2 cents there. Any other comments?
Well, it will come to fruition if and when we match up with them, or Clemson does.
Yeah.
And no one's talking about Clemson.
Yeah. Maybe it's time we start.
But, yeah, I think so. And so, LSU, I mean, they got by Bama, but that was an emotional win. It got very close at the end. But when you go up against, there's really only it's a 3-team, it kind of looks like, There are 3 teams clearly head and shoulders above everybody else. And we know we have a good defense, so why? Clearly we would have the advantage, and I would probably say the same thing with Clemson at this point.
I would too. Yeah, Clemson. I think we can. I think we can put an end to this. Clemson narrative that they've been sleepwalking through the season. They're kind of like the 2015 Ohio State team or that 2014 Florida State team that were just kind of hung over from winning titles the year before. I mean, since that close call against UNC, Clemson has won 45-14, 45-10, 59-7, 59-14, 55-10, and then yesterday against a halfway decent Wake Forest team, 52-3. I don't know about you guys. I don't want to see that Clemson team. If we can avoid them in the playoffs, that'd be fine by me. They're starting to round into form, and granted, I know their schedule sucks, but they're doing exactly what you would expect an elite team to do against that schedule, and actually they've been doing it for quite a while now. Anybody have any comments on Clemson while we're on the topic?
I can't. I hope we do get to play them.
I would like to play them. This is the team I would like to play them with.
So, Mike, you'd like to play them? Matt, sorry, what were you saying? You said you'd also like to play them?
Yeah, because I think that, it's the cheesiest way to explain it is kind of like this is kind of a revenge fantasy team. It's
exactly.
Like you want to go back and take out everyone that's ever slided you.
Yeah.
So
this is like Kill Bill 3, right? It's a Tarantino revenge fantasy. All right.
There you go.
Is it just because you had your heart broken so many times, Sloaner? You want some revenge tour?
Definitely.
I want to see Dabo's face when we beat them. That's what I want to see.
I love how you intentionally mispronounce Dabo Sweeney's name. Dabo, I love it.
Oh, yeah. I can't stand Dabo.
Paige, my heart is black as the night. It doesn't get broken.
We haven't even gone there yet, and it was probably the biggest storyline of the whole day, which was Tua Tagovailoa, Alabama's starting quarterback, done for the season with a dislocated hip. So the question is, so is Bama done for the season? Mike, what do you think? How do you see Bama's chances now without Tagovailoa?
I think I've seen their backup QBs, who aren't bad. Isn't his little brother one of the backups? Something like that.
I'm not sure. Yeah, he is. Yeah. You're right. Yep.
They'll still be formidable. They have to get their biggest challenge is getting by Auburn, and if they don't do that. Even if they do that, they're still not going to win the West. They're not going to be in the SEC championship game. Is that right?
That's right.
Assuming LSU with their hay in the barn.
That's right.
So I don't think it's an uphill. They'd have to get votes, and they're just not going to be the same team. So I think they are done.
They're done.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing they'll have to deal with it's not so much about Alabama as it is about teams behind them now that are going to have opportunities to play big games and then move ahead of them in the rankings. I mean, unless there's chaos. Go ahead, Paige.
That's why Baylor losing was huge for Alabama. I think Bama is not done. They're not done. Their backups are good. It's not like they've got Chugginoff. Their backups are 5-star guys.
Yeah.
And that guy that played when Tua was out was fine. Is he Tua? No.
Jones.
But if Oregon stumbles and LSU's making the playoff, Bama won't go play in their championship game. They'll be the 4th seed. Mark my words.
Wow.
No.
Yeah, I would also say that they, like LSU, their defense isn't stellar, so that makes it harder for their offense to, since they're on shaky grounds with their quarterback. Extra emphasis is going to be on them to pick up the balls, and can they? That will be the story.
So that is a good point. You had, of the teams that are kind of on Bama's heels in this week's playoff rankings, you had Minnesota sitting there at number 8. They lose, they're out. Oregon and Utah are right behind them at 6 and 7. They're both 8-1. They play each other. They will play each other in the Pac-12 title game. So you would think, should the winner of that game come out, well, then it comes down to a debate. If you've got a 12-1 Pac-12 champion between Oregon and Utah sitting behind Bama, that could be a tough call for the committee. And you're the committee. You're sitting there. No Tua Tagovailoa. Bama did not play in their championship game. They're not a conference championship, conference winner or champion. And you've got a Pac-12 champion at 12-1 sitting there. Man, woof. I think there could be some real heat on the committee. And Oklahoma, right? That's true. Oklahoma got themselves back into the conversation, didn't they?
And I'm not saying that Bama would be necessarily the most deserving team, but just say there's a scenario what you just described, and Utah is the Pac-12 champion. What do you think that line would be?
On a neutral field, if
against
it's Bama,
Alabama,
if it's Bama and Utah, well, then it comes
down.
then it comes down to the age-old question, right? Is it most deserving versus best team? That is very much looking like the conundrum the playoff committee is going to be in because of the way things shake out. Now the other thing is, what if Georgia wins out? They play LSU in the championship game. I believe that game's going to be played in Atlanta. That LSU defense pretty shaky. What if Georgia upsets LSU? Well, then that would take Alabama completely out of the conversation, right?
Right.
So, well, maybe it's a little too early to go through all these scenarios, but Paige, you do make a good point. Alabama's gotten the benefit of the doubt before. We've seen it as Ohio State fans. It's not over yet. A lot of crazy shit can still happen. And who's to say Oregon and Utah might not stumble before they play each other? I don't know if anyone's a huge believer in those two teams. They're good teams. I don't know how good they are. Anyway, that's a very interesting. Things are starting to heat up.
That injury, man, that injury is brutal because apparently he dislocated his hip when it popped out, but then he broke the bone also. Which our buddy Tommy was over. He said it's a very similar injury that
Bo Jackson
had.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Which ended his career.
So,
yeah, he was done.
Yeah,
after that.
I mean, it's really sad.
He was never the same.
That's a bummer for that dude.
Yeah.
That's an awful injury.
Awful. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll know in a few weeks. Things are starting to come into to focus here. Paige, I agree with you. LSU, Ohio State, Clemson appear to be a cut above. And then beyond those three teams, it'll be really fun to see who gets that fourth spot. And I think the playoff committee is going to end up with a real conundrum, having to pick between probably a one-loss Pac-12 champion and Alabama. It's starting to look that way.
Which is kind of cool, right? I mean, the controversy is fun, right?
Oh,
it's
for
fun
sure.
to debate. As long as we're not one of the controversial teams, it makes it stressful.
All right, so I wanted to move. I was saving this game for the last one that we look at because that'll lead us into a discussion about the Penn State matchup next week for Ohio State. Penn State, Indiana, yesterday. Penn State ekes it out by a touchdown, but Indiana made it very uncomfortable for them, and in fact outgained Penn State 462 to 371. Indiana quarterback Peyton Ramsey finished with 371 yards passing. He hit several plays down the field against that Penn State secondary. I thought he looked very good, and I thought that Penn State secondary continues to look more and more vulnerable every week. Remember the week before, Tanner Morgan of Minnesota, he threw for 339 against that Penn State secondary. I also noticed that the Penn State defensive line is not getting the same level of pressure that they were earlier in the year. Only 2 sacks yesterday against Ramsey. The week before against Minnesota, only 1 sack. Only 3 total tackles for loss for the Penn State front 7 yesterday. That includes the 2 sacks. And really, Indiana seemed to be able to do whatever they wanted in the passing game. I don't know that bodes well for Penn State going into Saturday. Chad, give me your impressions of what you saw in that game yesterday.
Well, I'll be honest with you, man. Indiana should have won the game. They played a better top to bottom game than Penn State did, and I feel bad for them because they came out and looked well. Penn State's defense, man, they are weak.
Yeah,
they are not that good. Like I said, Penn State, they have a history of playing us tough, but honestly, I think it's going to be over at halftime this week.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm starting to come around to that view myself. Mike, did you watch any of that game yesterday? And if so, what'd you see?
We caught a little bit of it. That Ramsey guy, another hot and cold Big Ten quarterback. I mean, he looked good. He was throwing darts. He's done that to us before.
Yeah.
But then Indiana, but they played their best game. But I was wrong again. I had Penn State convincingly at home. What was it, a 14-point line?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Maybe you could say Penn State's looking ahead. I doubt it. I think they're just right around the same level of an Iowa, Minnesota. They're just I don't think we're going to have a problem with them either, really.
It is fair to mention, it's only fair to mention that KJ Hamler did not play. He was in concussion protocol for Penn State.
That's right.
I'm sure that probably had an impact. Certainly not on the defensive side, which was my big takeaway from that game. Paige, what did you see in that game?
I think I think Indiana's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I don't think Penn State's that great. And so since it's, I thought it was kind of a game that we expected. I wasn't surprised that Indiana made that close and, had a chance to win it. And then I also, like I said before in the pod, I think it's, the fact that then, Minnesota loses to Iowa, Penn State's, they're good. They're a good team. They're not great. But that doesn't mean that they can't give us some problems next week for sure. And I think Indiana's underrated. I mean, Indiana should have been ranked. They've got a pretty good team there. So I wasn't surprised by that outcome at all. I'm just excited for the game next week and finally step up in competition against Penn State. It'd be awesome.
Matt, what did you see in that game yesterday?
I game cast that game. I didn't actually watch it. I tuned in for like here and there. But, similar to what I said about LSU after Alabama, maybe Penn State was feeling a little weary after getting the beat down from Minnesota. They're playing at home, they're playing a team they should beat. They don't have probably their star offensive player. And Indiana's not a bad team. The thing I keep taking away from all these games, even Michigan State and Michigan, like there is 2 levels of teams in our conference. There's us, and then there's these other teams that are good but not great. And it's fun to watch them because they play well against each other. The only teams they don't really play well is against us because we just have too much on both sides of the ball. Mm-hmm. So Penn State will Penn State is, and their coach will come in with a good game plan. The key, which I've never seen Penn State do well, is make adjustments. So, I'm not too worried about next week, but they'll come in. First half will be exciting, and then, there'll be some drop off.
Yeah, I think I know where I'm going to go with my pick later this week when we do the prediction pods. And I understand the recent history. I'm well aware of the recent history between these two teams. You go back to 2016, it was a 3-point game, a 3-point loss for Ohio State on the block field, a 3 or 4 point loss on the block field goal return for a touchdown by Penn State late in that game. That was Ohio State's only regular season loss that year. 2017, we had to make the big comeback and eke it out by 1 point. Last year as well in Happy Valley, we eke it out, win by 1. Actually, you look at the last 2 Ohio State-Penn State games, the Buckeyes trailed by double digits in the fourth quarter of both of those games and came back to win. So I'm probably going against my better instinct and thinking Ohio State wins this one convincingly or, comfortably, I guess. But there's 2 issues that I see with Penn State that do not bode well for them in this game, going into this game, and I think could end up giving us a much different result in the last 3 years. Their secondary is vulnerable. They don't have a lot of size in their secondary. We've seen lesser offenses in both Minnesota and Indiana really exploit that secondary for big chunk plays in the passing game down the field. Lots of yards, lots of points. If I'm a Penn State fan, I would be worried about that going into this game in the shoe against Ohio State. The other thing is, Penn State doesn't run the ball particularly well, and I've been trying to pull up their rushing statistics and where they stand nationally. I'm not going to find it here before I finish. But they don't run the ball particularly well. They're a middling running team, and I think that also does not bode well for them next week. I think Ohio State can turn them. Now, I do think their quarterback is a pretty good playmaking quarterback. I'm blanking on his name. Sorry, guys, if someone can remember his name. I think he can make some plays with his feet, and he can extend plays in the pocket, find guys downfield. I think Hamler's a good receiver. But I just feel like you have to be more of a complete offense to come into the shoe and beat this Ohio State team. And I think you're in big trouble if you're giving up those kinds of passing statistics to the likes of Indiana and Minnesota. So I'll give you guys my prediction later this week, but I'm feeling pretty good about Ohio State going into Saturday against Penn State. Any other comments on Penn State?
I'm glad it's at home.
Yeah, me too.
Even though they have a weak secondary, that crowd, they can get some pressure on field.
That's true.
It's. I'm just glad it's at home. We have our hands full.
So Penn State is 53rd in the country in rushing offense, and
wow.
Yeah, I just that's they're a middling rushing team, and I don't think it's for lack of trying. I just don't think they have anybody that can run the ball with. There's certainly no Saquon Barkley in that offense, and I think that's something I would be concerned with. And the other thing I was going to say, I forgot to mention this, is I would also be a little concerned about the front seven, being unable to get pressure against both Indiana and Minnesota. They didn't get a ton of pressure, only 3 sacks in their last 2 games. But maybe Penn State, maybe Franklin's got the formula. I know I listened to Doug LeMarie on the Cleveland.com pod last night, and he thinks it's going to be a good game. And his feeling is that this Penn State just gets up for this game. James Franklin knows how to prepare for Ohio State. They have the type of athletes that aren't going to be intimidated by Ohio State. And maybe all of that's true. Certainly the last 3 results between these teams would point to that. I don't know. Then again, LeMarie in his predictions, I don't know how much stock you can put into it.
Yeah, I don't think so because, to your point, like there is no Saquon Barkley on this team, and that guy's like a freaking generational running back, right? And so I just think from a talent perspective, Ohio State and Penn State the last few years were actually close or closer than they are right now. Clearly, Ohio State is the superior team. Clearly, we have just better athletes than Penn State does. Who do they have that scares you? And, okay, fine, they got Hamler. Take him away. How are you going to beat us with your, 6'4" tight end? I mean, that's really what they're going to have to do. Is that going to be enough? I doubt it.
Yeah, this is not the 2017 Penn State offense coming into the shoe. It's just not. This is not Saquon Barkley in the backfield. They had a good group of receivers that year too. This is not Mike. That tight end's pretty good. He might be about as good as Mike Gesicki was.
Yeah, he might be.
But I'm not sure Sean Clifford is the same type of quarterback that we've seen, from Penn State these last 3 years, as dynamic and game-changing a quarterback, although he does have some playmaking ability. I don't know. And, it's a different approach. I personally didn't think Ohio State played very well in those last 2 games. I didn't think they were very prepared. They didn't seem to be prepared. They didn't seem to be up for the game. And I wonder if Ryan Day is going to take a different approach. Sorry, Paige, were you going to say something?
Just that, Trace McSorley was a hell of a good college quarterback and could have flashes where he was good. Like, he could kill you.
Yeah.
Especially with his scrambling ability. Clifford's just not the player that even McSorley is, at least not yet, right?
Yeah.
So, we're not doing predictions, but I think we're all sort of leaning a certain way at this point.
I mean, we could literally get the fan base to do a self-induced whiteout, and we would still win.
So you're feeling good about it as well. Yeah.
Z, I will say, I think this is a game that Ryan Day keeps the gas on the pedal the entire game.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it would be kind of fun to see, like J.K. Dobbins and Justin Fields, play a whole 4-quarter game. It's been forever since we've seen. I mean, when was the last time these guys played 4 quarters? I don't know that they have all year.
Yeah.
So I'm saying all this at the risk of sticking my foot in my mouth next Sunday because the results have all been close. I still really feel like that Michigan game for me looms as a much bigger test for them this year than Penn State, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And everyone, think about what your score prediction is going to be for later this week. Guys, are there any other comments on next week's big matchup with Penn State?
No, not on that, but I would like to say one thing before closing that
Sure.
On Fox's yesterday they were playing the Michigan fight song, and I don't know who it was. I think it was the guy on the corner spot asked Urban if he knew what the Michigan fight song was. He goes, "No, but I know 7-0."
That was awesome.
I thought that was sweet.
That was awesome, and I think they had Charles Woodson on the set, and that's why they had asked him. So he said that. I think Charles Woodson had just given they panned to him, and he had just given a pregame speech, like a mock pregame speech to Michigan going into the game, and he gives us some impassioned speech, and then I think they started talking about the fight song, and that's when they turned to Meyer and do you know the words to the fight song? He's like, I know 7-0. Anyway, that's great. Well, on that note, guys, it was a good effort for a Sunday. Thanks for making the time early in the day. And why don't we wrap things up here, and we'll reconvene later this week to talk about Penn State.